समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
As you might have seen from the story done by Snehesh Philip, our defense editor, Indian Navy has decided for now not to focus on expanding its carrier force, aircraft carrier force, but to shift resources again now towards submarines because the logic is simple. If you are confronting the Chinese Navy to your east and the south through Malacca Strait into South China Sea, so on and so forth, basically into the larger Indo-Pacific, you need to be able to provide sea denial because China by now has a very large navy. In fact, China has more ships right now than the US Navy. At the same time, if you're looking west towards Pakistan, then since you already have a much stronger navy than Pakistan, then what you're looking at is sea control and domination. So what is it that Indian Navy should focus on? Because resources are not unlimited. Now there has been a debate with Indian Navy and the planners for decades. I would say for more than 6 decades now. In terms of what should Indian Navy focus on? Ideally, you'd like to have both, lots of submarines and plenty of aircraft carriers. But in real life, resources are limited, very limited. So you have to make your choices. Indian Navy started with a carrier. It started with a carrier, the first Vikrant in 1957. 1957, then it required fitting and all that, and then it became operational. It was bought in 1957. It was actually being built since 1945 as HMS Hercules, and then the Second World War ended and the British decided not to complete it. Later, they worked on it again. In 1957, it was bought by India. In 1961, it was operational. On 3rd of November 1961, it joined the Indian Navy in Bombay, as it was called then. And soon enough, it saw action. It saw action in the Goa operations. Now, Goa, we know that there was no real opposition for the Navy. There was no opposition in the air, and the Portuguese had no naval assets there. Nevertheless, it saw operations there. Indian Navy started out with aircraft carriers, and that then became a tradition. Vikrant was upgraded consistently over time. In fact, from Seahawks to Elyses, from Seahawks, which were its fighter aircraft, it then graduated on, it was retrofitted, and it then moved on to the VSTOL era. That is the British Harrier aircraft, vertical and short takeoff and landing, VSTOL. Those were bought for Vikrant. It was used in the 1971 war. In the 1965 war, it was in dry dock. So that was the first Vikrant. It was decommissioned in 1997. So about 40 years since it was bought, about 38 years of service with the Indian Navy. Because Indian Navy had developed a tradition and also training, manpower resources, doctrines, already it had invested in a second aircraft carrier. That became INS Virat. That also was an older British Royal Navy aircraft carrier. Used to be HMS Hermes. It was in fact the flagship of the Royal Navy force that went to fight in the Falklands War, or what the Argentinians would call the Malvinas War, and launched a lot of combat sorties from it, shooting down 20 Argentine aircraft. Again, the Argentinian Air Force at that point wasn't very much to write home about. It was a very unequal battle. Lost 2 of its own aircraft to ground fire, but was seen as a success. It was then acquired. Falkland War was 1982. Indian Navy bought it in 1986, 24th April 1986. Thereafter, doing the usual fitting, retrofitting, etc., it was commissioned on 12th of May 1987. So you can say that for a decade between 1987 and 1997, Indian Navy had 2 functional aircraft carriers, although the earlier Vikrant was often under repairs or under refurbishment. It was quite old by now. The new aircraft carrier, which is HMS Hermes, which was now called INS Virat, was also carrying Harrier aircraft. INS Virat, after long service, it was also deployed in operations, at least in operations without really any firefight taking place on the seas during Operation Vijay and Operation Parakram. And then, after 30 years of service with Indian Navy, it was retired in 2017. By that time, it had a successor, and this successor this time was not from Royal Navy. It was not of the British origin, because initially, as India started out as an independent nation, the British owed India a lot of pounds, and some of those pounds were used to make these purchases from the British. That is a story that we'll talk about some other day, by how come India had so many hunters, gnats, Centurion tanks. In fact, initially, most of Indian armed forces were built around British equipment. That is not the story for today. The successor of Virat was INS Vikramaditya. INS Vikramaditya has an interesting history. It was actually built in what is Ukraine today, in a dockyard that you hear about a lot if you track the war in Ukraine. That is Mykolaiv. So Mykolaiv is a dockyard where the Soviet Navy ship called Baku was built. Then you know what happened? By the time the ship was about to be completed, Soviet Union broke up. So Baku became the capital of an independent nation. Azerbaijan, big famous tourist destination now for Indians. So they changed the name. They changed the name and they renamed it after Admiral Gorshkov. Admiral Gorshkov was the founder of the modern Soviet army. And then what happened? Because Soviet Union had completely collapsed by now, and with the end of the Cold War, they simply could not manage another aircraft carrier. So this was sort of written off in a way, and it was waiting for a buyer. So Indian Navy then bought it. The first purchase, initial, I would say the advance was paid in 2004. Then it took some time, in fact, a lot of time fixing it. INS Vikramaditya, finally, it was handed over to Indian Navy by the Russians at their dock. It came into Indian Navy's service in India on 14 June 2014, just after the Modi government had taken over. Now, there was a fundamental difference between this aircraft carrier and the others, because this was a much heavier aircraft carrier. If you look at the size of our aircraft carriers, the first one, INS Vikrant, was 19,500 tons. The second one, INS Virat, was 28,700 tons. Both finally flew Harriers, which is V-stall aircraft. This one now, INS Vikramaditya, 45,400 tons. So that was a much bigger carrier, still medium-sized compared to the carriers, super carriers that, say, the Americans might have, but much heavier, much bigger than the ones we had earlier, and now flew proper long-range jet aircraft, namely MiG-29Ks in this case. That has now been joined by the new Vikrant. The new Vikrant is INS Vikrant, made in India. That is also called IAC-1, Indian Aircraft Carrier 1. That is 262 meters, so in length a little bit shorter than INS Vikramaditya, but a lot more modern. And that is the experience, and that is the success on which the Indian Navy, its designers, think that they can build more aircraft carriers. That's one. Then you look at what's happened with submarines. I'm giving you this longer background before the boss comes in. On submarines, the Pakistanis were first off the blocks. And there might be a theory on that. The theory in that will be that the Pakistanis thought they had fewer resources. They were a smaller country, a smaller navy. They were facing India, the only adversary. They didn't have to worry about a China or anybody. So they should look at sea denial, not sea control. India was looking at sea control vis-a-vis Pakistan. They thought sea denial. So they acquired their first submarine in 1964. Of course, it helped that Americans were their allies, or they were America's allies in the American-led, quote-unquote, supposedly anti-communist alliances. So they got their first submarine, PNS Ghazi, which was originally USS Diablo. So that came into Pakistan Navy service in 1964. At that point, Pakistan Navy became the only one in the entire Indian Ocean region to be driving submarines. So India, the first with with an aircraft carrier. Pakistan is the first with a submarine. That's a submarine that was sunk off Vizag in 1971. Then the Pakistanis acquired French submarines, the Daphnes, and then more French submarines, Augustas, and then Chinese submarines now. So the Pakistanis focused on submarines right through. India's first submarines started coming in 1967. That's when the India-Soviet defense relationship became more mature under Mrs. Gandhi. And these were called Foxtrot class. Foxtrot class, the first Foxtrot came in 1967, December 8. It was called INS Kalvari. Kalvari is, countries like to name submarines after sharks, particularly in India. So Kalvari is the Malayalam name for tiger shark, and you know what? Navies like to resurrect these names. As new generations of submarines or ships come in, they are resurrected in the names that existed earlier. So Kalvari is a name that you will keep hearing about. This was commissioned on December 8, 1967. Then more Foxtrots came in, and then the Scorpion submarines from France. But even though Soviet Union kept on declining, that connection never died with submarines also. So India built a large force of kilo-class submarines, many of which are still operational. Some have been retired. In fact, one was also gifted to the Myanmarese Navy. So that is the comparative history of India and Pakistan on their relative preferences, how one went the aircraft carrier route, the other went the submarine route. Now that India has two operational aircraft carriers and work will start on a third one soon, the plan right now seems to be to not look at the fourth so that at any point of time there will be three carriers, but two will be enough, following the old principle, the Dr. K. Subramaniam principle of what it is something that he said about nuclear weapons, more is not needed when less is enough. So Snehesh, after my long preamble, you tell me what exactly has happened.
See, what exactly has happened is that the Indian Navy has been thinking and speaking about having, being a force capable of operating three aircraft carriers at the same time. So, as per the original plan, you had, Vikramaditya, then Vikrant was supposed to be there, and then there was supposed to be the IAC-2, right? So, which means that the Indian Navy's plan was that if and when, at any point of time, they will have two operational submarines. And in case the third one is on a refit, in terms of war and all. Now, what has happened is that the IAC-2 will not be the third aircraft carrier, but the IAC-2 would be the replacement for INS Vikramaditya. Now, INS Vikramaditya is set to be decommissioned over the next 10 to 12 years. So the theory is that even if the Navy proceeds at whatever pace or the government proceeds at whatever pace, the IAC-2 will come in only at a time when either when Vikramaditya is about to get decommissioned or when Vikramaditya has been decommissioned. In the foreseeable future, the Navy is not going to have three operational aircraft carriers. This is because while the Navy may want three aircraft carriers or four aircraft carriers, the government is of the view that the focus should be on submarines. So if you've seen, the 30-year-old submarine program has actually been tweaked by the Narendra Modi government. The 30-year-old submarine program, which was not going anywhere.
What's this 30-year-old submarine program?
See, this 30-year-old submarine program was something which started in 1999. It got cleared, and also from by 2030, India was supposed to have 24 conventional diesel-electric submarines, right? Which meant, and the projects under which it was supposed to be pursued was the P-75, which is the Scorpions. Then there was supposed to be a P-75 India project, right? And then there was supposed to be a P-76 project, which is actually Project 76, which is actually an indigenously designed and built submarines. So since 2000, since the time this 30-year-old project actually took off, only 6 submarines have been built, right? And that too after much delays. So the 6 submarines are the Scorpion class submarines. The P-75 India has not taken off. Right now, among the 2 contenders that were there between the Spanish Navantia and the German TKMS, the TKMS has won the bid. The road ahead is supposedly very long. In the meantime, the Indian Navy has decided, because there was so much of delay and the submarine strength was coming down, because the kilo class, as you said, was ordered in 87. So, over the next few years, you will have these kilos, even though they have gone for an upgrade, the earlier ones cannot go for an upgrade and eventually will be phased out. The Navy, as a stopgap arrangement, has now decided to go in for 3 additional Scorpion submarines. So initially they were only supposed to be 6. Now the Navy is going in for 3 additional Scorpion submarines, hopefully the contract of which would be inked within this fiscal.
And these will be built in India.
These would be built in India by MDL. MDL built the HTWs.
Must now document it.
Yeah. MDL built the HTWs back then. It built 6 Scorpion submarines, will build 3 more Scorpion submarines. And incidentally, MDL is the one which has won the bid with TKMS for building 6 more submarines with AIP, that is Air Independent Propulsion System, for the Indian Navy under Project 75 India.
So what is this Air Independent Propulsion System that you can read so much about? And will these 3 Scorpions additionally that will be built have the same system?
See, the normal conventional submarines have to surface every 2 to 3 days to recharge its batteries. So that's when the submarine is more susceptible to any kind of being spotted, being under attack.
And once it's spotted, then today modern navies have the wherewithal to keep you under track. Yes.
Yeah. So, but with an AIP, Air Independent Propulsion System, this will allow the submarines to remain underwater for up to about 2 weeks, minimum 2 weeks, right? It can extend up to 3 weeks. So, which means that to recharge the batteries, they don't have to come up every 2 days or 3 days. They can come up only, which means that it adds most to the stealth capability of the submarines. Now, incidentally, India was supposed to, the Scorpion class submarines, the 5th and the 6th, where to have an AIP system, which has been indigenously developed. That was by the DRDO. Tragically, as the story goes, it was not developed in time. So you have the 5th and the 6th that have been commissioned without the AIP system. So now the first Scorpion class submarine is going to that was commissioned, is going to undergo the refit this year. So the aim, at least the hope, is that the first Scorpion class submarines will get the AIP system that the DRDO has done.
The existing ones.
The one, there's no existing one, the new one that the DRDO has developed.
All right.
So it has to go through,
No. So will the existing submarines be retrofitted with the AIP?
Yes.
Yes, that's
so
what
every
I mean.
time the upgrade happens, it would be retrofitted with the AIP.
Which means the new ones, the 3 additional ones, will have this DRDO
Yes,
AIP.
will have the DRDO.
But are we quite sure that the DRDO AIP is now working?
So the DRDO has developed the AIP. Now it has developed the AIP. Some work is being done by the Larsen and Toubro. It has to be fitted into with the help of the naval group, which is the French group, which makes these submarines along with MDL. So one is still not sure whether that is a process which has been completed. The Navy is not sure. The DRDO is working on it. That's what the DRDO says. So one is still not sure whether the submarine refit will undergo that AIP system.
And independent of all this is the development of SSNs and SSBNs. In fact, right now India has built SSBNs. India is focused on SSBNs. SSBNs are nuclear powered submarines that carry nuclear weapons. That is the third arm of our triad of deterrence.
Absolutely. So, when I said that the Modi government has tweaked, so instead of 24 conventional submarines, the Narendra Modi government has decided that there would be 18 conventional submarines and there would be 6 SSNs, which are nuclear, powered by nuclear submarines, but these are not ballistic, these are not the SSBNs. So that has been tweaked. Now, of the 6, the approvals have come in for the first 2. Right now, there are multiple questions. People say, why only 2 have been given? Because it is done in phases. So the first 2 would be built. For example, even the SSBNs, the Arihant class of submarines would be different from the next set of SSBNs that have been built in India at this particular moment. So similarly, for the SSNs too, the first 2, would be built, and then the subsequent ones would be upgraded or more modernized version of the first 2 that has been built.
Yeah, and this is a completely different project.
This is a completely different. The SSBNs are actually financed, comes under a different set of financing. The SSNs financing will come from the Indian Navy funds.
Indian Navy funds, and Ministry of Defense funds.
Yeah, the Ministry of the capital, allotment that is given.
And these will all be built in Vizag.
These will all be built in Vizag. That is where it has been built. It has a lot of private companies also part of this.
Including and especially Larsen and Toubro. I don't know if people work there 90 hours a week or not, or if they stare at their wives or husbands. They have the time to do that. We can laugh over that.
Yeah, so Larsen and Toubro, L&T is part of this.
But if you go to L&T's headquarters in Mumbai, you see a model of Arihant, Arighat, one of those submarines kept there, very proudly displayed there.
Incidentally, L&T was never into defense. So L&T came into defense in the late 80s, early 90s. And the first project itself that the L&T got into in terms of in a big project was actually the Arihant project itself.
Yeah. It gives us the nuance, the difference between sea denial and sea control. And is the submarine, is the general belief correct that aircraft carriers are about boom, 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 that they're about strength, show of power, about destroying the other guy, and submarines are essentially defensive? Is that correct? Not correct? I'm not saying it's correct. You decide.
See, as far as when I look at it, there is no doubt about the fact that aircraft carriers are about strength projection, right? It's majestic. Imagine, such a large ship carrying X number of fighter aircraft, floating ahead with his entire the battle group itself. That is indeed a show of strength, right? But, you need to have the strength first to show off, right? And what the submarines do is the fact that they are difficult. They operate underwater. They are difficult to track. Even if it's a nuclear one, more difficult to track. That is why it's called sea denial, which means that it is difficult for any of these surface ships to enter the waters that the submarines are protecting.
Yeah, because you're never sure.
Never sure, right?
What's lurking underneath.
Yeah, what's lurking underneath. And with the new submarines, the new stealth features, the new missiles are on board, the torpedoes are much longer range. So it becomes very difficult. Along with it, of course, the fact that if you have long-range missiles, anti-ship missiles fired from both surface vessels as well as from the land, right? That becomes a whole different ball game itself, right? So the government at least is of the view that fine, aircraft carriers are great for show projection. It will eventually need, but at this point of time, India is focused on the Indian Ocean region, right? India is not focusing on transcontinental missions, stuff like that, in terms of military missions, offensive missions, right? So as far as the Indian Ocean region is concerned, government is of the view that we have an aircraft carrier, we have the second aircraft carrier. Now probably there would be a third one which will come, but it will be a replacement for the Vikramaditya. It will never have three operations. The focus should be on building more submarines, which is denial. The focus should be on long-range missiles, both anti-surface and anti-ship, and the fact that the focus should be on unmanned underwater systems. For example, the Russia-Ukraine war itself has shown.
Ukrainians have used them very effectively.
Absolutely.
In fact, Ukrainians have exposed the vulnerability of large capital assets for a navy, because the great Russian Navy has ceased to exist in Black Sea now.
Yeah.
Its flagship there sank, many other key vessels sank, and then they've withdrawn whatever else they had. So, in fact, Black Sea right now is free of the mighty Russian Navy.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that has to do with drones and underwater drones as well. Unmanned underwater systems.
Yeah. So this is what the government is focusing on. And then the former serious late General Bipin Rawat was of the view that aircraft carriers, and he said in as many words in public and in private conversations also, they were like sitting ducks. Why he used the word sitting ducks is because the Chinese have built anti-aircraft carrier
buster missiles.
The carrier busters, which are supposed to take down the 1 lakh ton and above aircraft carriers of the US Navy. Here we are talking about 45,000
and they can fire those. Missiles can be stopped, as you've seen now in Israel and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Missiles can be stopped, but the Chinese can also fire them in volume.
In volumes, in numbers. That's
Numbers.
that's the game. Plus, aircraft carriers themselves cannot defend itself. So that's why the aircraft carrier moves with its battle group.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I will not endorse. In fact, I will question the description of sitting ducks. I think that's if I may be, with great humility, I would say that this is a little bit of an infantryman's view of warfare at sea.
Yeah.
Right? Anything can be vulnerable, but yes, the question is, if you're exposing such a lot of capital assets, a whole
Yeah.
battle group, how much firepower are you taking there? If you're only taking some 20 MiG-29 category aircraft, then it doesn't look quite worth it. But if you have something bigger, that's good. But until you have something bigger, maybe it is better to build or buy something that will give you more effective deterrence meanwhile, and that is submarines.
Submarines, and plus, as well as the aircraft, even in the region that India is focusing on, with modern aircraft, with mid-air refueling, a lot can be done. So, as I said, the government is not against aircraft carriers. I'm not against aircraft carriers, but the focus right now should be on building the force capability. Now, imagine, Indian Navy was supposed to be a 200 ship force by 2027. It has been cut down to 170, right? The fact is that there has been a huge jump in the capabilities of the Pakistan Navy, because of its collaboration with China. The Chinese, right now everybody focuses about the fact that the Chinese are building aircraft carriers because the Chinese have global ambitions. But before building the aircraft carriers, the Chinese built the submarines, and they continue to build the submarines. We are outnumbered in terms of Chinese. If you look at the numbers, it's going to be really scary. We are outnumbered by not double, by not triple, but much more than that.
Actually, it was a stirring moment that we commissioned 3 sizable ships just the other day.
Yeah.
But the fact is that India's overall naval force, in terms of combatants, ships and submarines, is about the same as it was numbers 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And some of the vessels are quite old right now.
Exactly.
So a lot of modernization is needed. And Pakistanis have one area of comfort, and that area of comfort is that they have only one adversary, and they have well-defined objectives. They have no other adversary at sea. They have no need for power projection anywhere else far away from their shores. And third, they know that all they have to do is to increase the cost of war for India, the cost of war with them for India. So they use that denial strategy, and they then don't get confused. And that's and they've got sort of an endless supply from the Chinese.
Absolutely. And whatever that the Chinese will have will eventually go to Pakistan, as you say, in case there is anything that is needed. So you're looking at Pakistan and China as one.
Yes, absolutely. I've always said that Pakistan is like China's protectorate right now. So India is triangulated between China and Pakistan. Now, can India break out of this triangulation? That will be the ultimate strategic win when it is achieved. One day it will happen, which means either India will settle its issues with China or with Pakistan. But as long as India has the two-front situation, India will have this challenge of balancing. Indian Navy will have the challenge of balancing the needs of sea denial on one side and sea control on the other. And that is the perspective in which we have to understand the current shift or current thinking of focusing for the near future. And the near future can be 10 to 15 years?
Can be much more than that, actually.
Can be much more than that. In the near future, which is not so near, in the near future, to focus on building your submarine strength, because it would be reasonable to think that for Pakistan, India has enough and India can build enough. India has enough and India can build enough. Also remember that India has these unsinkable aircraft carriers, which are the island bases in Andaman and Nicobar. Some are there, some more are being built. Lakshadweep also, similar bases can be built. So India has a lot of space for maneuver there, as long as India's air power is built, which is a different challenge, and we'll talk about that in the course of time.
You rightly mentioned, the Air Force and the Navy are actually complementary to each other. And that is the reason why the Air Force, there should be a focus on the need for more fighters as far as the Air Force is concerned, and at the same time, refuelers and also evacs. That is the need of the hour.
Because refuelers and the AVACs are the force multipliers in the
Exactly.
skies, irrespective of whether your planes have taken off from the deck of an aircraft carrier or from a shore-based
Absolutely.
airfield.
Absolutely.